Welcome to Finding Contentment, the official podcast of the American Institute of Stress. The goal of this podcast is to explore the science, psychology, and practical wisdom that can help us manage our stress. If you are looking for personal growth and professional success, or just want a more fulfilling life, visit us at stress.org. And now here is the host and executive director of the American Institute of Stress, Will Heckman.
Hey, greetings, everyone. This is your host and executive director for the American Institute of Stress. It's Will Heckman. Thank you for joining us once again today. I'd like to ask all of you who are listening to this podcast today to go to stress.org, look at our magazines and subscribe to them. They're absolutely free, and I think you'll get a lot out of them. And also, help support this channel. Please hit the like and subscribe button. It really helps this channel grow, and we really do appreciate it. And to show our appreciation, make sure you stay tuned, because we're going to give you, our listeners of this podcast, a very special code. And that code can be used for 50% off all memberships to AIS. So stay tuned. We're going to give you that code in a little bit. Hey, joining us today is Dr. Jeff Jernigan. Jeff is a well-known board-certified mental health professional. He's rated by the Wellness Council of America as among the top 1% of wellness experts in the country, and internationally recognized as a global workplace stress and trauma thought leader. His work in healthcare and engineering, manufacturing, and higher education has taken him to 42 countries and counting around the world, and as an internationally recognized thought leader and educator on the prevention of burnout and self-directed violence that is associated with mass violence and disasters, Jeff also worked with military and government agencies on 3 different continents. Over a 30-year career as an engineer, hospital administrator, clinical director, he's served as CEO, COO, CHRO, is a whole alphabet soup after his name. He's also been a board chair in those roles across multiple industries. All helped Jeff continue his practice as a leading psychologist. His professional memberships include, of course, the American Institute of Stress, but American Association of Suicidology, Wiley Psychology Panel, the International Association for Continuing Education and Training, and the American College of Healthcare Executives. We are very proud that he's a fellow of the American Institute of Stress, but also he is our editor of one of our publications, Contentment Magazine. And to see that, all you have to do is go to stress.org. It's absolutely free. It's a bargain. And speaking of bargains, as I said before, hope you got a pencil, paper. It could be a pen. We're going to give you that code for 50% off any membership for the next 30 days. In honor of our friend Jeff Jernigan's, that code is JJ50. So JJ50, if you join up in the next 30 days, you use that code, 50% off, worth a fortune. Please join me in welcoming our guest, Dr. Jeff Jernigan. Hi, Jeff. How you doing?
Hi, Will. I'm doing great. How are you today?
I'm doing really good. I'm so excited about talking to you. First of all, I love talking to you anyway. By the way, absolutely awesome job with the magazine. It's just unbelievably great information, beautifully done. I have to give you congratulations on that. It's not an easy job.
Thanks, Will. We've got an outstanding team behind that magazine, and the credit goes to them.
Well, a little bit goes to you. Come on, Jeff. I understand. One of the reasons I want to talk to you, I know you've been traveling lately with your lovely wife, Nancy, and you visited some, for lack of a better term, some very stressful places. And I was hoping we'd start off with you tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, we have been traveling over the last 30 years, bringing healthcare, education, leadership development, and family support to limited access countries, struggling with the outcomes of war and violence, famine and disease, natural disasters, economic collapse, places where there is risk and oftentimes continuing conflict going on. And we do several things while we're there. We model and teach how to recover and thrive in these conditions, working with first responders. As we move through the crisis, begin to work with the academic infrastructure, providing curriculum for their schools and colleges and universities that will train healthcare workers and first responders for future needs in their country. And then thirdly, we work with government agencies providing policy advisement so that the resources will be available the next time a pandemic erupts, the next time a tsunami comes through, the next time there's violence involved and it displaces people and creates crisis for them. We have a great team involving over 750 people working even today as we're here together on 3 continents.
Amazing. I thought about, because we've talked about this before, but I thought about the places that you go to in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of all this tumultuous life going on, trying to bring order to it. It's got to be a daunting task for you to do. You do an amazing job. I don't think there is enough thank you. Thank you doesn't really cover it for all that you do. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about today, and the actual title of today's podcast is The Stress of Broken Families, which kind of leads into the people who go through all of those traumatic events. And I know you've written about it and you've talked about it, but I'd like it if you could discuss with us how, first of all, tell us what a broken family is, but how broken families can contribute to transmission of stress and the trauma across generations in the family.
Yes, it's a dynamic that is worldwide. The change in the family structure, you can imagine with displaced people for any reason. That family is experiencing stress and trauma just trying to get to safety, find enough food to eat, provide shelter for their children. Families in areas of disease or natural disaster or even war and violence lose family members. Children lose parents. Parents lose children. In Rwanda, which we'll get back around to a little bit since that was our most recent trip, in a single year during the genocide, over 1 million people were murdered. And that left tens of thousands of orphans with no family. And so surviving family members would take some in, neighbors and friends would take some in, strangers would take some in, and for some, an orphanage would become their family. So this changes the nuclear family structure and dynamic radically, because it's now an extended family that includes strangers, all of whom are suffering trauma and stress and stress disorders. So we've had to find ways to equip these extended families with an understanding and an ability to cope with a new dynamic in family structure.
And that goes on for generations, doesn't it? I mean, okay, so that often, that child, or even a family that's suffered losses of part of their family, that stress goes that goes on and on and on, even when the acute situation ends.
Yes, yes. In fact, in some countries where we've been working for a number of years, we've discovered that the third and fourth generation after, say, a tsunami is still experiencing trauma, and those people weren't alive. They weren't born when the trauma occurred, and yet they're still suffering traumatic injuries associated with something that they were not alive to experience, and it got a number of people around the world concerned about how is this happening. And we've got three answers to that so far. One involves the fetus in the womb. When the mother experiences stress and trauma, her brain chemistry changes. And that alarm and that chemistry is passed on to the fetus through the placenta. So now you've set the emerging brain in that fetus up with triggers to its own response to trauma, which seems incredible until we think about how the brain is formed in the fetus. It's the first organ to form. That's because it's the control system for everything else in that child's body. It comes first. And the first organ in the brain to take shape is the amygdala. That's the little structure in our brain that controls the fight, flight, or freeze response and triggers any number of other hormonal responses in the body. So you have a fetus now with a brain emerging that already has an amygdala, and that amygdala has a rudimentary memory. So when the mother experiences trauma, that experience is passed on to the fetus. Now, the fetus, for lack of a better way to explain it, remembers the feelings of that trauma, but its brain is not developed enough yet to store the factual data anywhere. So the baby's born, becomes an infant, becomes a small child, but their amygdala has already been sensitized. So if it experiences something that triggers it out of its experience in the womb or as an infant, it's not going to remember the details. It's just going to have a panic attack. It's going to have a screaming fit. It's going to act as if it is in great fear. And the child, the infant, doesn't understand that. Neither do the parents. There's nothing in their environment, in their experience, that should create this in the child. And yet, that response to trauma has been passed on from mother to child in the womb.
Wow.
The second cause for generational or intergenerational trauma is one we're very familiar with: poor parenting, abusive behaviors, adverse childhood events that create attachment disorders in the child. And then those children that have not gotten through or past that attachment disorder, with or without help, grow up to be adults with attachment disorders. And the adult's behavior rearing the child creates an attachment disorder in the child. And so it's passed down from parent to child through the behaviors of the parent. Third cause is something that is just so amazing and miraculous to me. DNA can be changed in response to sustained trauma, a repeated trauma, and pass on a vulnerability and sensitivity to stress and trauma to a child through the fourth generation. The first study
fourth generations.
Yes.
Amazing.
The first longitudinal study that showed that with evidence-based research was the Holocaust. And in our work in Rwanda, since 2016, we have discovered that that is true with survivors of the genocide there also. There was the generation that experienced it. Then there's the generation that witnessed how their parents responded to that and grandparents responded to that experience. And then there's a third generation now that has a sensitivity to those triggers that's been passed on biologically, genetically, and behaviorally. And now they passed it on to their children, fourth generation. So that's the best explanation we have at the moment for how broken families can contribute to the transmission of stress and trauma across generations.
I was going to ask you about that because the Holocaust affected my family. But I certainly wasn't directly involved. My grandfather escaped. I'm second generation born in this country. Certainly I've learned about it, but when I see things like the movie Schindler's List, it profoundly affected me. Just because of it's so that trauma of the generations is even for something like that, and I'm amazed about the other things you told me that affects the amygdala, which is our alarm system. It's an alarm going off and say, oh my God, wake up, something bad is happening. When that happens in the room, I had no idea. Thank you for sharing that. I had no idea that was even possible. Yeah, and I was going to ask you if there were like significant differences between how the manifestation of the management of stress and trauma between what we're calling broken families and those more stable families. I don't even know if those titles, those labels, I don't know what they really mean. I don't know what a stable family is. I know what I think it means, but everybody's family is different. But in your point of view, you've studied this for quite a while. For lack of better terms, let's call it a broken family, the families that you've seen that have gone through basically hell on earth, and families that have not. Is there a difference in the way those kids manage their stress, even though they weren't directly involved in the traumatic event itself?
Yes and no.
Thank you.
Let me be definitive here.
You're
yes
right.
and no. There is good news. Because a family has been impacted by stress and trauma, and that can be passed on to children, doesn't mean that those children are going to pass it on to another generation. It doesn't mean that even though the children are exposed to that previous generation's stress and trauma, doesn't mean it's going to impact them. Right. And we're talking about broken families that are broken because of disaster, trauma, bad things that have happened to them, not other reasons for breakup in family. This is the impact of stress and trauma on families. One of the important things, not the only thing, that help children not respond to trauma in previous generations is their mindset. Do they have a optimistic, positive mindset in general? In other words, it's a matter of temperament or personality. Because we see in families that have generational trauma in their lineage, with children who are generally optimistic, positive, glass half full, tend to be more resilient, and tend to do better, and tend not to pick up the aspects of response to trauma and stress that previous generations had. People that are pessimistic, that are always discouraged, are glass half empty people all the time, will struggle more with what's getting passed on generationally than those that are more positive and optimistic. The key aspect in that we've discovered is hope, which is what the next issue coming out of Contentment Magazine focuses on. Hope is the foundation for all change, all positive change. So if you have a child growing up in a family that has generally a positive mindset, has a confident expectation about the potential for good things in their future, is with their children encouraging and uplifting, even though children need discipline and correction, they're basically coming at that from the perspective of we want to help you be the best you can be in life, not we're going to punish you for what you did.
Right.
Which goes back to parenting. Those families tend not to pass on generationally much at all, if anything, to their children. And again, it's a function of biology and genetics and behavior that does that. So yes, intergenerational trauma is a fact. It can get passed on, but it doesn't have to.
Do you think part of it has to do with, as you go down the line of generations, that it lessens?
Yes.
Like, certainly my daughter has I don't want to say less of a connection, but a further connection with the Holocaust than I do.
Yeah.
So I think it affects her differently. Let me ask you something. I know it's a tricky question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Is some of it just nature? And the reason I ask that, you and I have both been educators. My wife and I have both been educators. We try to bring our daughter up a certain way to have a positive outcome. Say, yeah, but everything worked out fine. Look, we're here. Like, it's okay, and sometimes that doesn't work. And her nature was sometimes to stress about things or overly stress about things. And then I don't think that had anything to do with the family structure. Do you think people are just predisposed sometimes to listen to those voices in our head that drive us nuts?
Yes, and that's what makes it a very, very complex issue. It is nature. It is nurture. The thing I remind parents of often in my conversations with them about their children is that children get to a place where they're making their own decisions, and we hope earlier in their life we prepare them to do that well, but they have a free will.
Yes.
And they're going to make bad decisions just like we did when we were their age. And we hope they're outnumbered by the good decisions, and we hope the consequences to their bad decisions are minor lessons, because if they continue in that behavior, they're going to get into life at a point where bad decisions have huge consequences. And again, it's our biology, our genetics, and our behavioral framework in life that add to those things.
I agree with that. My wife and I had a saying, because our daughter was known to trip on a blade of grass. So we used to have a saying, let our kids fail in a padded room. Yes, they need to fail, but to a point. The overprotective dad that I am, the overprotective dad that I am, my daughter broke her arm 3 times. But, it's still, it's I understand what you're saying. You're right. It's part of nature. It's part of I think the easiest way to say it is that everything contributes to it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you just got to try and do the best you can. I worry about, and I'm going to ask. I promise I will get to a question in a second. I worry about the broken families that I have seen. As an educator, I have seen kids come in from war zones. I have seen kids come from natural disasters, and they're it's hard to get over that trauma for them. That becomes the focal point of their life. I don't know, and every kid is different, every person is different. So I didn't know how to help them get over that thing. The only thing I knew to do was help them to maybe shift their focus to some of the good things that were going on.
Yes. Yes. A parent's love is the best healing agent ever created when it comes to helping our children. And when we don't know what to do, just love them. Just love them.
Let me ask you about, you said you were in Rwanda?
Yeah, well, let me go back for just a minute. You stimulated
oh, sure.
My mind as I was listening, and I want to share some helpful information with our audience before we get too far. TraumaFreeWorld.org is an organization that teaches adults. Anybody can go to their website and take a course on what's called trauma competent care for parents with children, for adults with adult children. Their course is free, and it helps educate us on how to deal with trauma in our own lives, and how to help prepare our children to deal with trauma in their lives when they're adults. I wish I had that training as a parent, as a young parent myself.
Right.
For children, they have a course called Trauma Informed Care. So when they show up in your classroom, when they show up in your neighborhood, you've got 7 skills you can choose from depending on the child and their behavior that will help that child grow out of that behavioral pattern response to trauma. So there is hope out there. There are resources out there. A child doesn't have to grow up feeling that way. My family will, going back to World War I, consists of 5 generations of combat veterans, and I'm right in the middle of the pack. And
we thank you all for that.
Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you. And so we have 5 generations of potentially passing trauma on to our children. And it hasn't happened. But we have had to work at it individually, personally, taking responsibility for whatever our struggles may be, finding answers, getting help, and getting to a place where we're healthy enough that we're not passing that baggage biologically or genetically or behaviorally onto our children. So the families can escape that. They can take an end run around that experience. and I really hope that people do take advantage of those resources. Now back to your question.
Well, first of all, I agree with you. For a short time, I was a first responder. I was part of NYPD. And I had one rule. I wasn't even married then. I ended up married a short while into the job. My rule is when I took off my uniform, I didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about it anymore. I didn't need to put those images that I saw that day, unless it was really a good thing, into some loved one's head. They just didn't need it. You just dealt with it, in whatever way you did. Unfortunately, no one taught you how to, but you found a way. to get back to, by the way, what was that website again? I'm going to put it on the bottom of the screen so people can see it.
TraumaFreeWorld.org.
Okay.
No spaces or hyphens or periods. TraumaFreeWorld.org. Wonderful organization.
I appreciate you saying that. One of the reasons we have this show is to bring hope to people that are going through these experiences and are just lost, just on the verge of giving up. Don't give up. There's something you can do. The one thing you should not do is nothing. You always can do something. I did want to ask you about your trip. It's first of all, it's a very difficult subject, and I know it's very long, but give us one instance, one anecdote or a case that illustrates how complex it is with the families there and what they're going through and their dynamics of the stress and trauma across, since we're talking about multiple generations.
Yes.
If one comes to mind too.
Yes. A family that we're involved with there and have been partners with them since 2016 adopted 2 orphans out of the genocide. So we've been able to watch their family mature over those years since then. These young children, 5 and 7 years old when they were adopted, have grown into young adults now. And they still bear the scars emotionally of that experience. When they had the freedom as middle schoolers, learned how to self-medicate with alcohol and drugs. And so that became a problem. They developed some self-protective behaviors that allowed them to use anger and violence as something to push people away and not let them get involved in their lives. And we walked with that family through those episodes when we were there. But of course, lots of early morning for us and late evening for them calls. And what do we do? That we got into telemedicine long before they had telemedicine.
You were the pioneer.
Yes, but those 2, we just spent 2 weeks with them. They have grown and developed into fine young men. The older one is married with a child and another one on the way. But it took patience and perseverance and a lot of love. And a village, not just mom and dad, but extended family, even if they're in America, to help guide them through that process. It's like roaring down the freeway on one of your motorcycles, and suddenly your throttle sticks, and you're crossing 4 lanes and bouncing off the lane guard, and then screaming down the freeway and bouncing off the other lane guard. It's just, life was like that for a little while, and for them and for their parents, it was driving them crazy, but they did get through it.
It's amazing, and I got to tell you, you're very lucky to have you. Could you imagine going through all that and not having a Jeff Jernigan to call and talk to? I don't know what would happen. And there is something I wanted to talk to you about. You brought up the self-medication and the drug thing. For me, that has been a problem, not me personally. But when I was a teacher, we had, for a long time, problems with pregnant moms who were drug addicts. We just called them, for lack of no matter what the drug, we called them crack babies, and they were children. And let me tell you something, crack couldn't care less what ethnicity, what social, standing you are. It doesn't care. When these babies were born, they were premature. And they had a lot of physiological problems that as a teacher, I don't know if we were trained, but we learned to recognize, okay, this kid is one of that group of babies, and it happened for like 10 years. I haven't seen it as much lately, thank God, I think through education. But those babies were born with physiological problems. They were always very small, always underweight. But they also had a lot of emotional problems that had to develop in the womb. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you, because it didn't really occur to me that would be remembered, throughout that kid's developmental years. They didn't remember their mom doing something, and a lot of times the mom, because children have a way of curing some ills too. All of a sudden I have a child, I'm going to clean up my act, but that kid had problems that were developed in the womb. What do you do about a kid that's that kid, or the kid that developed those problems in the womb, that they don't have a conscious memory of it?
Right. In fact, still today, fetal alcohol syndrome is a huge problem, because the moms think they can have a drink and not go overboard. You can't, that's why doctors say don't drink. Alcohol is going to impact negatively the development of that baby in your womb, and then you're gonna have children that are suffering throughout their entire life with fetal alcohol syndrome, and it can't be cured. All we can do is help that child learn how to adjust and adapt to that. So all those things we talked about in terms of the normal development of the fetus in the womb gets changed. And it depends on what the chemistry is the mom is absorbing. It depends upon when in the child's development in the womb the worst of that occurs. But the end result is that you have a child whose brain does not function normally.
Yes.
And you can help the child learn skills that will help build new neural pathways. You can get to a point where they're functional and they can manage any deficits they have. But for others, the damage is so great that they're going to be a special needs person for the rest of their life.
Yes, almost every one of those kids ended up in a special ed track in their education. Almost every one. And the reason I bring this up is because I know a lot of moms who listen to this show are stressed out. They're going to become a mom. They don't know what to do. You might be very young. It might not have been expected, might not have been planned. But let me tell you something. The way to deal with that stress is don't do the bad things you would do if you're not pregnant either. Don't drink, don't do drugs, don't self-medicate to make yourself feel less stressed, because now you're not only affecting yourself, you're affecting your child too. And besides, once they're born, you'll be too busy to be stressed out. Sleep deprived and all that stuff. But it is such a blessing. I can't begin to tell you. So one of the reasons we're having this discussion today is we want you to understand that from a public health perspective, that there are a lot of ways to manage your stress. Don't do it the bad way, because as Dr. Jeff Jernigan will tell you, that doesn't work out too well. All right. Finally, one of the last things I wanted to ask you about is, because we talked about it a little bit, and I don't want to go too long. God, I could talk about this for a very long time. But your hidden value group.
Yes, that's our parent company.
Please tell us what you do, because people are not going to believe me when I say the guy has been to 42 countries and 3 continents and is seeing the worst that could happen. I'm not kidding. Tell us about your group and where you go.
The Hidden Value Group was founded by my wife and I 30 plus years ago. The Hidden Value Group names comes out of the idea that every soul, every person on the face of this planet has hidden value. And that's balanced against the reality that everyone on the face of this planet struggles with something. It's just a matter of degrees. None of us handle life perfectly. So we created an organization that in the worst of situations that people face in their life, we could bring healing, health, and hope around the world through that organization. Now that's a for-profit organization which we use to subsidize 2 of our nonprofit organizations, which actually are in the field doing the work. One is Olive Branch International. The website for that, if you want to know more about them, is olivebranchinTL.com. They do the work on the ground of providing healthcare, education, leadership development, family support. The other organization is Marketplace Ministries Worldwide. We discovered years ago that it's one thing to go into a country in crisis and help them through that crisis, but we're geared up to be very mobile, respond to a crisis, and then let the other organizations that are structured better for the long-term recovery take over. But in that gap between our work and recovery, there's a period of time where economies have been destroyed. So we created an organization, Marketplace Ministries Worldwide, that would come in behind us and oftentimes with us and help establish appropriate micro-enterprise for those destroyed communities. 6 or 8 families together can have a chicken farm or an egg farm. 6 or 8 families together can have a solar program for providing light at night so kids can do their homework. 6 or 8 families can come together and farm. That can come together and purify water. All things that are going to be needed in that gap. And we set these little family groups up to do that. We train them. We provide the materials they need, and we set them up so they can make a profit. They're now feeding their family, and they're feeding other families. And we've done that in Sri Lanka after the tsunami. We've done that in Sierra Leone after Ebola. We're doing it in Ukraine right now. We're at the early stages in Israel in doing some of those same things. But that's who Hidden Value Group is, and who the partnering organizations are that Nancy and I provide leadership for.
Just an amazing amount of good that you do on this planet.
We got good
Jeff,
people.
you and Nancy, you should get a Nobel Peace Prize as far as I'm concerned. You know what?
Well, I'd have to divide that up into 750 plus little pieces for all the heroes we have.
I agree with you. They all deserve their name on that list. And there's a lot of good people out there in this world. They really are.
Yes.
I've met some. But those good people are not going to get on a plane and fly to a different continent, fly to Africa, and stick themselves in the middle of a famine and do the actual work. That takes a special person. Thank you, Jeff. One more question before we go, buddy. When Jeff gets stressed out, how does he manage it? When Jeff Jernigan's having a day where he's seen a little bit too much, what does he do?
Well, I don't do it perfectly well. And in the early years, I struggled with that because we go between times of high energy to exhaustion and discouragement. But we learned, Nancy and I both, over the years, to find a rhythm to our lives that's fit for the season in our lives. I'm at an age where I don't have the energy I had as a 20-year-old. So I can't work in the same way as I did when I was 20. So that's what I mean by where we are in life, our season. Now, we need to have a rhythm, and our rhythm right now consists of 5 elements. Nutrition. We know that 36 of the 48 nutrients our brain needs to survive each day come from our food. So we don't want to starve our brain by eating junk food or not eating or eating the wrong things. Secondly, exercise. We know that exercise is needed to keep us in good physical shape, but it also keeps us in good mental shape also, because when we exercise, there's an enzyme that's created that goes to our brain called a neurotrophic factor, and it triggers while we sleep cleanup, the repair of neural pathways, the elimination of dead neurons, the replacement of neurons. It's like the janitors coming into the building at night after everybody's gone home. So we have an exercise routine. Sleep. We need for me now. I need to average over a week 8 hours of sleep a night. The nice thing is when you have shorter days and shorter sleep, you can make it up. Sleep you can always make up. You're not losing out there. Probably one of the more important things is meaningful relationships with people where I can process what I'm going through. Meaningful relationships involve 3 things. People that you can trust with who you are. They're not going to judge you. Secondly, people who will keep your confidence. They're not going to talk about you to others. And thirdly, people who listen well, who actively listen, that ask questions and draw you out and help you see things from a different perspective. And that kind of processing resets my mindset, particularly if it started in that spiral down into discouragement. And then the 5th element is purpose and work. Does your work energize you? Does your work excite you? Does it produce in you a sense of healthy fulfillment and satisfaction, not gratification? If you had a perfect day, would it be so perfect that when the day was over, you'd still want to be doing what you were doing, but people have to drag you out the door because you can't stop? Is that wonderful? So the other things we do, we take little breaks now and then, 4 or 5 days out of something. After a tough trip, we stop on the way home somewhere nice and decompress. We work a 4-day work week. It doesn't mean that we don't work on those other times, but those other times are times for family, times to reconnect ourselves with one another, times to do recreational things that our workday didn't allow for. In fact, we've gone from riding 10-speed bikes up tall mountains to riding electric bikes around town. But they're pedal assist, so we're still getting exercise.
I understand.
So rhythm of life.
Yeah.
Continual learning. We need always to be learning something just to keep our brain active, keep it moving forward, keep it developing. I'm surprised at how many of my peers after age 50 aren't doing anything with their brains, and they become couch potatoes. Now, I have to, because of my profession, there's a certain amount of learning I have to do and report on every year. But Nancy doesn't have to do that, but she's a learner. Right. She's an educator. So that keeps us sharp mentally. The other thing we do is we try to identify those times when we're being stretched and balance that stretching experience with a nourishing one, something we experience as nourishing. So those are some of the things we do to help us stay real, be authentic, not hide, take responsibility for our junk when it shows up, and keep moving forward with meaningful friends and purpose in life.
You know what? All of the things that you mentioned are so doable for all of us. They really are. You know, Jeff didn't say you have to be a competitive athlete, just exercise. You don't have to be any kind of nutritionist. Just watch your nutrition. Watch what you eat. Get enough sleep. If you listen to Jeff and how he manages stress, they all make sense, don't they? And for you and I to do them is not that impossible. Jeff, thank you so much for all that you told us today. I always learn so much when I talk to you.
Thanks, Will. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
And I'm looking forward to the next Contentment magazine. I can't wait. I love reading it and seeing all the you get a great mixture of contributing authors and editors, and they all have such fascinating things to say. They really do. I mean,
I'm in awe of them. It's easy to be an editor when you're working with authors that are smarter than you.
And you don't have to be in the stress business to read this magazine. You really don't. It's really down to earth. It's really for you guys and girls like you and me. And so make sure you go to stress.org, check out the magazines, check out some back issues too. We also have Combat Stress magazine that just came out. So like I said, go to stress.org. I want to thank Jeff for being with us today and for all the things he and his wife Nancy do to make this world a better place, and for all the things we talked about today. This has been your host, Will Heckman. I want to thank you for joining us today. Don't forget that code is JJ50 to get you 50% off any membership. And I also want to remind everyone, just as stress is different for each of us, there is no one stress reduction or management strategy that is right for everyone. So that means you have to come back next time and listen to our next podcast, where we're going to discover and talk about new stress management techniques and tools. Until that time, we hope you find contentment. Good day, everyone.